All right, God is great, of course, but let's call Proverbs 4. My son, I have led in this proverb that seems to break down into three sections. Two sections calling his son to hear, and a third section calling his son not to swerve or deviate from healthy paths. The first section going from roughly verses 1 through 9, calling his son to hear. Why? Because the instructions are good. Next section going roughly from verses 10 through 19, calling his son to hear. Why? So that he can stay away from painful paths or the paths of the wicked that lead to painful consequences. And as we said in that third section of verses going roughly from verses 20 through 27, he is going to say, my son, do not swerve either to the right or to the left of healthy ways. Understanding that as we break it down, verses 1 through 4 may show Solomon calling to his sons, basically to hear a father's instruction. Why? For they're good precepts. And he's not simply dictating things that he has not had to learn from his father. As he is going to say, they come from when his father sat him down and counseled him in ways that have actually proved effective if we know the larger context of Solomon's reign. He is not just talking as a man failed. He is talking as a very successful man, helping his son understand the context of his success and how it goes back to these words that he got from his father. As he goes on in verses 5 through 9 to make a relatively famous statement saying, get wisdom and insight. Do not forget, turn, or forsake them. Understanding that if you love her, she will guard you, and if you prize her, she will exalt you. He's going to say a number of other things, but moving on to verses 10 through 19, once again, he is going to call to his son to not only hear, but to accept his teachings. Why? Because I have not simply taught, but I have led. Thus our title, as he goes on in verse 13 to say, keep hold of instruction. Do not let it go. Guard it. Because in verse 14, he is going to caution him, do not enter the path of the wicked, the way of the evil. Avoid it, turn away from it, and pass on. Understanding it's not just enough to avoid it if you linger by it. You need to turn away from it, and beyond turning away from it, just go a completely different direction. Reminiscent of something we've seen in the Psalms when in chapter 1, David reminded us that blessed is the one who does not walk, stand, or sit in the ways of the wicked, giving us a kind of progression. Walking is one thing, but standing is another, and sitting suggests that we're spending way too much time. Solomon, similarly, in this chapter is helping us to understand the way that you want to simply get far away from paths that may seem clever, but actually lead to pain. As he will go on to say in verse 16, for the wicked cannot sleep until they have done wrong or caused someone to stumble. In verse 17, he'll then go on and say, for they eat the bread of wickedness and the wine of violence. There's a lot of teaching in that because those verses are super consistent to what many psychologists will describe as symptoms of character disorders, the way in which certain character disturbances can begin to fill emotional needs through causing pain to others. But moving on, verses 18 and 19 are going to say, but the path of the righteous is as light. It shines in contrast to the way of the wicked that is dark. It actually leads to stumbling that they don't understand. The irony being the wicked take or find joy in causing stumbling to others. Solomon is reminding us of the subtle ways in which they actually stumble into the very same misery or misfortune they intend for others. As verses 20 through 27 are going to be another appeal to this time, my son, be attentive to my words, for they are life. Keep your heart with all vigilance, another famous passage. He will then go on to say, put away crooked and devious ways. Look directly forward. Ponder the path of your feet. And as we mentioned, do not swerve to the right or to the left. All exceptional advice that caused me to wonder, what happened to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, who became the king, who lost much of the kingdom through folly? And it wasn't a series or a lifestyle of folly as much as it was one foolish mistake, listening to his friends when Solomon's counselors, the wise men who helped make him successful, helped offer him the advice that might have kept the kingdom intact. But understand that, as Solomon will help us see at least by the end of Ecclesiastes, wisdom still has a context. And much like his father David understood that as much as God might have trained his hands for war, all his training had to exist in a context where God was inclined to make him successful. Likewise, all of Solomon's sage advice or exceptional advice here needed the context of Solomon's leadership and God's favor, begging the question that if we are even teaching wisdom to the younger generation today, are we then leading them with an example that would actually motivate God to bless the wisdom that we're giving them?